Okay, here we go. One of the last chapters of this course. This one's on environmental problems. I want you to begin thinking about how important is the environment to you. Is this something that you think about, that you consider is a concern to maybe you or your family or your community? Where would you rank yourself on this? So let's begin by talking about globalization. Globalization is really the exchange and interaction between people and communities across the globe. So its effects on the environment have vast consequences. So whether we're talking about the permeability of pollution, or we're talking about things like free trade and transnational corporations, think about the growth and how this affects not only local communities, but communities all over the planet. So think about the nuclear, if you recall, the nuclear problem that happened in Japan about a year or so ago, the Fukushima plant that exploded, and how California was finding radiation in the fish off the coast of California. So you can think about how globalization, the environment, and the interconnected between the two has vast consequences. So do we see pollution in our community? Because we can understand how there might be droughts in Africa, or the nuclear issue, whether we're talking about Chernobyl in Russia or the nuclear issue in Japan. But what about our community? And in what ways? If you were to check out this video, it's about 50 minutes long. You don't have to, but it's something that I've showed my classes in the past, and it's a great video narrated by a guy named, he's a famous actor named Edward Norton, and talks about this idea that the book talks about, which is bioinvasions. We have this rapid expansion of species into new regions. Think about a freighter or a freight liner who is going from China to the United States, or to throughout the country, throughout the world. And sometimes they have stowaways, whether we're talking about little mammals or rats, or little things hitched on to the bottom of the boat. And think about what happens when we introduce new species into the environment. So we're thinking about trade and tourism, and we begin thinking about how things along these lines that we do for economic reasons, how they can have an impact on our environment, on our local environment, because of something that didn't exist less than 50 years ago, talking about transportation. So how do the functionalists look at this? They see this idea of environment, globalization, humans as an interrelationship, in which there's this relationship between the environment and us. And there's unintended consequences at times. What are those unintended consequences? Well, again, think about things ranging from bioinvasion, which we just talked about, to the Fukushima power plant failing. All right, and then how do these affect our resources and our livelihood? What about this idea of the conflict perspective, in which the wealthiest 20% are responsible for most of the consumption? So maybe we're talking about water, maybe we're talking about oil, as you can see here, with the United States making up the vast majority of barrels used per day. What about this idea of planned obsolescence? What is planned obsolescence? It's dealing with technology in which technology is intended to be outdated in a short period of time. So think about the EPA estimates that 18 months for the average cell phone. How long have you had yours? Why do we only keep cell phones for a year, 2 years? Some of you may even say 4, but even that would be a long span. What is it about that? Why do we have versions 2.0 and 3.0 and 5th generation? And is a company consciously doing that? So we have a lot of garbage in the process. The average person uses about 5 pounds of garbage a day. So how do we reduce our consumption? Is it buying less? Is it buying smarter? Not throwing stuff out? And the third perspective looks at meanings and labels, how we define this idea of the environment. We talk about the big issue of global warming. Did humans cause it? So we're putting labels to these issues. Do we greenwash? Certain companies greenwash, where they use marketing to construct favorable meanings about their product. If they say something is natural, but what does that mean, something's natural? Technically, we could say nuclear energy is natural, right? And we can say a lot of our chemicals that we use are natural. So think about how companies market them. And think about Earth Day events. Do you think Earth Day should accept sponsorship from corporations with poor environmental records? So not only are we talking about globalization and we're talking about interrelationship, but we're talking about interrelationship within our ecosystems, which are those complex, dynamic relationships between different forms of life in the environments they inhabit. So we know that more damage has been done in the last 50 years than the last 200,000. So again, think about the ecosystems that are being destroyed because of human intervention. Check out this video if you can on the environment. I think you'll like it. So look at some of the things like world energy production. Look at what the United States is using in terms of energy consumption, along with Greenland, compared to some of the other countries. All right, those that are very low being in Latin America, Africa, the Middle East, parts of the Middle East, I should say. What are those things that we use? Fossil fuels like coal or petroleum. Nuclear is up there as well, and hydropower. So we're depleting these natural resources. We're collapsing environments, and there was a book written about this very idea in which environments are failing in some areas and have throughout history because of the depletion of natural resources, deforestation, all right, cutting down the trees, desertification, which is the drying up of our resources, turning them into deserts, and displacing individuals. Over 1 billion people lack access to clean water. So think about our energy consumption and think about what we've thrown away today. So here we can see the average American's energy consumption in a given year. And you can see how much gasoline they use, how much water or how much electricity. Here we can see the paper that we use. And by the way, do you recycle? Do you recycle anything from your printing and writing paper, maybe for school? Or do you recycle boxboard or cardboard for that matter, or newspaper? So let's move on a little bit. What about air pollution? About 50% of people in America live in counties that have unhealthy levels of air pollution. 3 million are attributed to this air pollution a year, but we don't hear that much about air pollution. Check out this link and learn more about polluted cities in our area. And of course comes this idea of greenhouse gases or the destruction of the ozone layer. Check out this video to see how that works. So the depletion of the ozone layer results in what? Things like skin cancer, cataract, weakened immune system, bad crops. So you can see the diverse effect that this has on everything from humans to animals. And we know that scientists are saying that the ozone depletion is unprecedented. Acid rain's another issue. It's this idea of sulfur dioxide, nitrous oxide mixing together, all right, and to pollute through rain and snow and fog that contaminate lots of different areas and ecosystems, crops, forests, lakes, rivers. So think about people that are vicariously, or in another way of saying it, which they're killed by climate change. So they're not necessarily being killed by any one thing. All right, so things like acid rain. Again, not something that gets a lot of play in the news. Global warming. This gets a little more play if we start looking at how glaciers are melting. Here you can see within just a few years the glaciers in this area melting, or rivers and lakes drying up here. I believe this is the Aral Sea. All right. Check out this video on greenhouse gases. It's actually an Al Gore video from one of his movies, but it's sort of broken down into a pretty amusing and convenient way of understanding it. So this idea of global warming is produced by greenhouse gases. But the question people have, the debate people have, is why? By who? Who is doing it? Is it humans or just a natural cycle of life? We can look at CO2 emissions, which are a part of greenhouse gases. And you can see throughout the world, all right, which was broken down by circles, who are the major contributors to carbon dioxide emissions, which come from things like engines, heating homes and buildings, and of course cars. Nuclear waste, associated to many defects from cancer to genetic due to radioactivity and whatnot. And again, the Fukushima Daiichi plant is a clear example of how there's unintended consequences of things like nuclear waste. Definitely check out and learn more about the Great Garbage Pacific Patch. If we want to talk about ways in which we've polluted the environment, this is a perfect example. The size of this is astronomical. You can see here, which is larger than the size of Texas. There's literally a sea of garbage because of currents and patterns than which garbage has collected between basically Japan and America. Definitely check out that video to learn more about that as well. What about plastic bags? Each one of us uses about 380 bags a year, and yet not even 1% are recycled. And it takes 1,000 years to degrade. Contains many toxic chemicals. All right, what else is in our environment? All right, we can see, or not in our environment, in our trash. Newspapers, metals, wood, glass, plastics. Another video about this idea of plastic and trash. I found this out on National Geographic magazine a few years ago, and it surprised me, and I think it will to you as well. This author went out and wanted to see what kind of chemicals people had in their bodies. So he used himself as a guinea pig, and he was shocked at the results. Everywhere from PCBs to pesticides to dioxins to things like Agent Orange. And to the right, there's a breakdown of what some of these do. Flame retardants. So it's incredible to think right now, how many chemicals do we have in our body and might not even realize it. If you want to watch sort of an explicit yet interesting, funny, thoughtful, entertaining, and provoking commentary, check out this George Carlin clip on his thoughts about the environment. So here you can see some of the most polluted areas and polluted cities and counties in the country. Most of them take place in the more highly developed areas of the Northeast and the Southwest. So what about this idea of environmental injustice? Those environmental refugees that can't support their livelihood because of droughts, because of global warming, sea levels rising, people being displaced. We call them refugees, and you can see where many of them exist. While some exist in the United States, think Katrina, many exist in places like Colombia, all the way to Pakistan and Congo, and so on and so forth. So do you think that the environment should take priority or the economy? If you had to pick one, which would you pick? What are our politicians picking? So if we're talking about things like biodiversity, and we talk about the threats to our biodiversity, we know that over 200 species a day are becoming extinct. Some say that this is the worst extinction since the dinosaurs. Is this natural? That's a harder question to answer. Some of the species that are threatened range from mammals to birds to amphibians to fishes and so forth. So what are the causes of these problems? Of course, population, industrialization, our attitudes in which we're individualistic, and our militarism, as well as our materialism. All right, so what are our patterns of consumption in the ways in which we produce in our culture compared to others? Are we a wasteful society? In many ways we are. Interestingly, sociologically, we know that women are more likely to be sympathetic toward the environment. Why? This is a question we often discuss and kick around in class. Now, on the other side of things, we have what are known as eco-terrorists, those in which try to protect the environment and wildlife, sometimes to the event of creating crimes, which usually cost at least $10,000 in damage. So we do know that there are consumers who want environmentally friendly purchase sometimes. Suppose an individual lives in an area where locally grown organic produce is not available. What's better? Organic produce that has been trucked in from a distant state, or locally grown produce from a farm that uses pesticides? So this idea of how we as a culture and our mindset, how we use and consume and produce products, isn't an easy answer. So how do we have this idea of sustainable development, the meeting of human needs while preserving the environment? Will we continue to cut down rainforests? Or will we think of alternative ways like the Kyoto Protocol, which is the first international agreement to place legally binding limits on greenhouse gas emissions, which the United States, as of today, I believe, still hasn't signed, and that was over a decade ago. So how much government influence should there be on our environment? Should the government take an active role in environmental concerns? If so, in what ways? If not, why? And again, it might come back to issues like the economy. So here's a brief lecture on the environment. Next lecture, we'll have one more on science and technology, and then we'll be done for the course. If you have any questions, let me know. I hope you enjoyed this one. Have a good one. Talk to you later.